And we're back. This is part 4 of the B7 build series, and we left off in part 3 bending our aluminum chassis. So today we're going to replace that chassis. We're going to test an LCG battery versus a normal Shorty battery, and then we're going to test out the carbon parts for the B7 and see if it makes a difference. But first, we broke our motor in the last video, and we busted up the sensor board by replacing the normal bearings with ceramics using the McLaren bearing tool. We heard back from Wits and they recommended using the Trinity tool. It looks like it's got a bigger cup that should fit the sensor board port inside, so clearance shouldn't be an issue. Now, we asked you guys in the last video, if we have to replace the chassis, do we get the short chassis? And most of you said yes. So we've got the short chassis here. Now, replacing this chassis is a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. You got to, of course, rip off the chassis protector, but the front and rear clips come off as whole units, and then you just take off the side guards and then the electronics. Surprisingly, there was so much fuzz and like carpet debris inside the chassis. It's kind of crazy how much of that collects. Now, with the transmission out and the motor removed, we gave it a spin and the transmission spins nice and free. That's exactly what we want to see here. Now, on the old chassis, we removed the foam pads because we want to weigh it to the short chassis. And what's interesting between the two chassis is that the front of each of the chassis is the same, but the -4 chassis is just shorter in the rear end. All the front holes line up, but it's the rear end that's just been pushed up 4 millimeters. Now, with our old chassis, you can see that the front kick-up, it's higher than it's supposed to be. It bent there as well as in the center bowing up. But the kick-up is higher, and then if you look at it straight on, the right side is also kicked up higher than the left. Now, on the scale, we've gone from 130 grams from the original to 127. Now, one thing to note, the new chassis does not include the battery pads, so if that's something you want to use, you're going to have to buy them separately, and we did. This is the package. Getting everything else installed is pretty easy. It's just the reverse of removing it all, and then in the end, we also put on a brand new chassis protector, a universal one that we then trimmed out. One thing to note is that the rear of the body is kind of snug up against the rear gearbox area with that short chassis, so we ended up trimming that body just a little bit. So with the car all buttoned up, we put on some brand new fresh fuzz bites. We can only get different colors, and we went to the track. Now, on the track, we have a new layout, and it's got this double tabletop section, and if you go out wide and go for it, you can land on the top of the second tabletop, and lap times are in the low 18s. If you play it conservative, I'm in the high 18s, but the car feels pretty good. It feels a little bit more nimble with that shorter chassis. The steering is really aggressive when these Fuzzbite front tires are new, which will tame as they wear down a little bit, but overall the car does feel pretty good on the track. The difference with this chassis feels pretty subtle, but it does feel just a little bit more snappy, a little bit better turning in response, and yeah, just a little bit more nimble, and I like it. All right, let's test some batteries, and it's debated quite a bit using a standard size Shorty versus an LCG, which is a lot thinner and a great way to drop a lot of weight for stock racing. Now, on the scale, the normal 6400 milliamp hour from ProTek is 220 grams, and then the ProTek LCG, the 4800, is 167 grams. So that ends up being a 53 gram weight difference, which is really significant. It's almost 2 ounces. That's a lot of weight. Now, we've shown this before, but this is our in-house 35 amp continuous draw test, and the packs start off similar, but then the 4800 voltage drops below the 6400, and then it stays there the whole time. So in the end, the 6400 is going to remain above 7 volts. It's just going to have more voltage for longer than the 4800 will, which seems like is a really great thing to have for stock racing. With the 6400 having a higher voltage throughout the run, but the 4800 being 50 grams lighter, which one is better for stock racing? Well, we set out to test this with both batteries fully charged, and we set a timer on my phone for 5.5 minutes, and then we paused the timer anytime I crashed. Now, we just want to get a feel for the car, drive it for that time, and then at the end, we'll check the data using the Hobbywing program box. Now, we did the normal Shorty first because it's the same battery I've been using this whole series, and it's what I'm used to the most. And to be conservative, I am not doing the double-double tabletop section. At the end of the 5.5 minutes, the 6400 milliamp had a max current of 74 amps. The battery was at 7.4 volts, and we had a max motor RPM of 26,446. Next, we switched it to the LCG pack, which is quite a bit lighter, so we had to reset our ride height, we had to double check our camber, and then we set the timer for 5.5 minutes. At the end of this run, interestingly, we had 112 amp peak current. I'm not sure why that's so much higher, but the end battery voltage was 6.9 volts, so that's significantly lower. And then the max motor RPM was 26,449, 3 RPMs higher than the bigger Shorty, which is probably due to the reduction in that 50 grams. Now, on the track, I have to admit it, the LCG pack felt pretty dang good, and I didn't really notice the voltage drop all that much. It may be not that significant to notice in those first 5 minutes. Maybe I was just overwhelmed with the driving experience. Maybe I'm not that good and in tune with the car and the batteries to really notice a difference. But I thought the LCG was all right, and I didn't really notice anything except one area where the car did feel a bit lighter, and then it felt just a little less planted on the surface. The heavier 6400 just kind of makes the car feel just a little bit more sunken in and settled. It's hard to describe, but there's definitely something to having that extra weight. For power loss, I totally could start feeling the power loss after that 5-minute mark. The LCG just kind of was limpy. It was like not much there, no punch, no power. It was just extremely soft, and at one point I thought the low voltage cutoff from the ESC was initiating, but it wasn't. The car was still going. It was just really soft. So in the end, more power versus less weight, I think they're both just tuning aids to use depending on your application. And for us, we're gonna go back to the 6400 to add a little bit more weight. That's where I think our car feels best. Next, let's try some carbon parts. And we've got the carbon front arms, the carbon rear arms, and the carbon side guards. Now, interestingly, when you give them a twist, we've got the front arms here. The plastic front arms flex very little. They're actually pretty dang stiff. I can feel just a tiny amount of flex out of them. And then the carbon ones are really stiff. I don't think they're flexing at all. Now on the scale, the carbon rails are 3 grams lighter. The carbon front arms are 1 gram lighter, and then the carbon rear arms are 2 grams lighter than the plastic rear arms. Now something interesting, when we were disassembling the cars to swap out the front arms, we realized we've got a bent front inner hinge pin. And I couldn't even tell the difference on the track. We must have bent the hinge pin when we bent the chassis, is what I'm assuming. Nevertheless, it's bent, and so we bought a package of new hinge pins, which thankfully includes all the hinge pins in one pack, and then we also picked up new Velcro straps to add onto the new side guards for our body. We then put it all back together. We bought a new rear Lexan wing too, cut it out and installed it, though it's not on camera, and then we weighed the car fully done, and it's 1471, which is a little under the weight minimum. Now after driving the car for probably about 10 minutes and we're back to using the 6400 milliamp Shorty, I really couldn't feel that much of a difference. I think there was like more of a placebo effect taking place in my mind where I thought I was feeling this and thought I was feeling that, but in the end, it was such a subtle difference to have the carbon pieces that the only thing I can really say that I felt is that the car just felt slightly more direct in my inputs in the steering and the cornering. Yeah, it was just really subtle though, and I'm not even sure if that's what I really felt or if that's just what I'm imagining that I felt, because that's what I'm expecting the difference to be. But nevertheless, the car drove great, it cornered great. I like the carbon parts. I like the plastic parts too, but I do like how the car feels, and we're gonna leave these carbon parts on there. People say they're more brittle than the plastic parts, but time will tell. Now the last thing we've got is something that's actually really exciting. It's this brand new servo from ProTek that's not yet released, but it's going to be perfect for two-wheel drive buggies. It's called the 815, and it's a mid-profile size case servo that'll fall in between a low-profile servo and a full-size case, because a lot of guys are liking the bigger servo for its extra strength and holding power on high traction carpet, and then for the extra weight that it provides. So with the 815, it's going to be kind of a middle ground, so it's going to be 10 grams heavier than the 160 TBL low-profile servo, but it's going to have 815 ounce-inches of torque while having 0.05 transit speed, which is incredible specs for a servo of this size, and it's just an absolute monster. So we've got the very first production sample that was sent to us. We're going to throw it in our car, get our weights back to where they need to be, and go drive one last time. As with any new servo, we set up our endpoints, and then we also had to recheck our ride height and camber because of the extra weight. And then out on the track, I couldn't really feel a difference in the servo speed and the extra torque. I mean, it's not lacking at all, but just compared to what we were using, I'm not really feeling any difference. I could feel the extra weight though. It's only about 10 grams, and our car is over the roar minimum, thankfully now, but that 10 grams does add a little bit more weight to the front end. The car kind of just pulls in a little bit more. There's just a little bit more steering, even despite our front fuzz bite tires being kind of worn. So this servo seems like a good choice, and we were hunting for a little bit more steering in the previous episode, and this servo's helping us get just a little bit more. So really happy with the car. All the things we've used, it's come a long way, and all these small little changes are like saving pennies that adds up to some real money in the end, and the car just feels awesome. So guys, I hope you're enjoying this video series. I sure am a ton. So thanks for watching this video, and if you want any info on all the stuff we've used, check out the links down below. I'm Brett from AMain Hobbies, and thanks for watching.